Yezras Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Chav Ches, and we're beginning a new Mishnah and new transition in the Masechta for a little bit to discuss common themes such as the mitzvah of tefillin, mezuzah, tzitzis, etc. But so we begin with this Mishnah over here on Daf of Chav Ches. And we're basically taking a pause in the Masechta regarding discussing Menachos. So we're starting from the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah begins. Shiva Knei HaMenorah. So we're discussing the menorah, which is, as you can see in the picture over here, the menorah over here has 7 branches. So what happens, the Mishnah is discussing, what happens if they made only 6 branches? Is the menorah kosher? Or let's say they made 7 branches, but they didn't make 7 cups on top. They only made 6 cups on top. So the Mishnah says, Shiva Knei Menorah Ma'akvin Zeh Zeh. The 7 branches of the menorah hold each other back. In other words, that the menorah is not kosher unless you have all 7. Shiva Nei Rasel, the 7 lamps, Ma'akvin Zeh Zeh. They hold back each other. In other words, each lamp is necessary. Otherwise, the menorah is not kosher. To make a kosher mezuzah, you have to have 2 parshias written in there. Shema Bohim Shmoya. If you just write 1 parsha, the mezuzah is not kosher. Not only that, says the Mishnah, Afila Ksav Echon Ma'akvan. Even if you're missing 1 letter in the mezuzah, it passes the mezuzah. Because the pasuk says uchsavtam, right? Uchsavtam means it has to be a kasiva tama ushlema. It has to be perfect. You can't be missing a letter. Same idea. Dalid parshias shebetfilin ma'ak v'zuazu. There are 4 parshias in the tefillin, which is the parsha of Shema, Bohem Shmoya, Kadesh Vayikriyacha, as we know, and each one is necessary to be part of the tefillin. And if you miss one of them, if you only have 3 parshas in the tefillin, then they hold each other back. Hi, Steve. We just began Chav Ches Amud Aleph by the Mishnah. Now, Filiksav Echad Ba'akvan. Even if you're missing 1 letter in the tefillin, so again that passes the whole tefillin. Now the Mishnah says, Dalit tzitzias ma'akva zuazu. The 4 tzitzis on a baged, on a clothing, they hold each other back. So if you only have 3, then you're not yoitza. Sha'abosan mitzvah achas, because you need 4 of them because they're considered 1 mitzvah. Says the Mishnah. So if a person is mekayim the mitzvah, he gets only 1 mitzvah. Rabbi Shmuel says arbatan, the 4 strings of tzitzis, arba mitzvahs. You get 4 mitzvahs for that. So we'll discuss more of that in the Gemara. Let's get back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Mishnah says that in order to make the menorah, you have to have 7 branches. How do you know? So we're going to reference this pasuk where in Parshas Truma it says, Vasisa menorah zahav tahar. You have to make the menorah out of pure gold. Miksha, what does miksha mean? It has to be hewn from 1 piece of solid gold. Te'aseh menorah, the menorah should be made. Yurecha, Yurecha is the bottom of the menorah. The base, the branches of the menorah. Gvieha, the cups of the menorah. Kaftareh, the buttons, u'peracha, and the flowers. Mimenu, you have to be part of the menorah. So the Gemara asks, how do we know that the konim, that if you leave off 1 branch, the menorah is pasul? So because the answer is because it says kaftareim uknoisam mimenu you. There have to be uknoisam. There have to be branches. That's what the Gemara says. So my tama havoya ksibahu. It says by the branches they have to be there. In other words, if they're not there, yiyu is like a strict word, like chukah. It has to be there, and if it's not there, then the menorah is possible. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa. Menorah hoisa ba min ha'eshes umin hazahav. The menorah was made out of 1 solid rock and it was from gold. So you need a chiseler to chisel out a menorah from a solid block of gold. However, says the Mishnah, says the Brisa, aso min grutaos. If you made it from pieces of little pieces of gold, pisula, then it's puzzle. If you make like you take old pieces of gold and melt them together to create a menorah, that's puzzle. Okay, but it has to be from gold. What about mishar mine matachais, from other types of metals? Kishera, it's kosher. You can make a menorah out of silver, out of tin, out of lead. So the Gemara asks the question, my shna, if you look at the pasuk seems to say from the very beginning, the menorah has to be made out of gold, miksha, and it has to be hewn from one piece of solid gold. And yet you say that when the Torah said zahav, it doesn't mean zahav. It could mean other pieces of metal. But if you don't do miksha, then the menorah is possible. So the question the Gemara is asking, why? That's the Gemara's question. Why is it if you make it from used pieces of gold, psula, it's the menorah is possible, because the pasuk says miksha b'havoya. The Torah tells you, miksha and mimenu yiu. The end of the pasuk says yiu. Yiu, as we saw before, is a strict word. So the Torah requires that miksha, it has to be miksha. It has to be from one solid piece of gold. Okay, so then let's say that if you make it from other pieces of silver, other pieces of metals, it should also be possible, because zahav v'havoya, it says, the Torah says it has to be made from gold, nothing else. So the Gemara says, Omakra, but there is a pasuk, miksha te'aseh l'rabbi shamine matches. The pasuk says, miksha te'aseh, as you can see in the pasuk, te'aseh is like a ribui. It marba other pieces, you include any other metals. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, let it say that it's coming to include that if you make it from grutois, from pieces of gold, it should be kosher also. Answers the Gemara, I can't say such a havana. When it comes to miksha, the Torah wrote the word havoya. Miksha and havoya is very close to each other. So therefore the Torah was very strict on miksha. So teyasa must be marba something else. Says the Gemara, teyasa, so the miksha ksiva havoya. Teyasa nami a miksha ksiv. So, but for that same token, the riba of teyasa also says a miksha. So maybe the Torah is saying it doesn't really have to be miksha from one piece of gold. It could be from grutayis, from smaller pieces of gold. And says the Gemara, miksha la'akev. The Torah wrote the word miksha twice to tell you that it's strict, not from yiu. The Gemara changed it. Here, the Torah tells you v'nisisa menorah zav tal miksha. So that's the first time the Chumash says miksha regarding the menorah, and then it says at the end, it says kaftereim kula miksha achas. So it says it twice, miksha. So the Gemara is going to ask the question, okay, then zahav also it says twice in the Chumash. Zahav, we see some menorah zahav tar, and at the end it says kika zahav tar yasa isai. So again, where do you draw the line? Why by zahav you say it doesn't have to be zahav? It could be any other metal. And why by miksha you say it has to be miksha, not grutais? So that's what the Gemara says. Miksha namilak, says the Gemara, zahav namilak. It says twice gold. So the Gemara says, hi mai. What are you thinking? The way we set it up, everything will make sense. If you're going to say grutais from pieces, it's possible. From other metals, it's kosher. Hainu zahav zahav miksha ledrasha. I could have everything figured out in the pasuk. Zahav zahav miksha eli amamir grutais kashera. If you're going to say the opposite, that pieces of gold, it's kosher. From other pieces from metals, it would be possible. then the psukim have extra words and you won't be able to figure it out. Now, in order to understand what the Gemara is saying is, you have to know that in Parshas Bahal Loischa, the Torah also repeats the story about creating a menorah. And there the Torah wrote, V'zeh ma'isa menorah, miksha, and then the Torah wrote miksha. So if you count up the mikshas, it says it 4 times the word miksha, miksha, miksha. There are 4 times, and a couple of times the word zahav. So everything will stim if we follow the first method of thinking, that grutois is psula and shamini matkas is kshera. Because the Tanya we learned to the Brisa, Kika Zahav Tar Yasa Oisa is called Hakelim Ha'ela, right? The pasuk says, make it from a kikar. What is the Torah telling you? Bahazav. The Torah implies that if you're using gold to make the menorah, bah kikar, you have to use kikar. Kikar is like a measurement. Let's call it 20 pounds. So then a 20-pound block of gold, that's what you have to use to make the menorah. But the Torah is telling you, Eina Bahazav, if you're not using gold, and it's permitted not to use gold, Eina Bah Kikar, then it doesn't have to have a kikar. So that's why it says kikar next to the word zahav, to say only zahav needs a kikar, but any other metal, and you're permitted to use any other metal, does not have to have a kikar. Giviyahu kaftarel forcha. The Torah tells you that it has to have cups, buttons, and flowers. Bahazav, if you're making it out of gold, then you have to make all the ornaments, the cups and the buttons and the flowers. As you can see in the picture, you can see that this is from the Art Scroll book of the Mishkan. It's a beautiful book. And here you see cups and the buttons and a flower. The flower is like over here on the bottom. So the Torah is telling you that only if you're making it out of gold, then you have to make all these ornaments. But if you're Eina Bahazav, if you're not making it gold, Eina Bah Gviyim Kaftarim Mufrachim, then you don't need the Gviyim Kaftarim Mufrachim. So now, the Eimaname Bazav Bah Konim, Eina Bazav, Eina Bah Konim. Maybe the Torah is telling you by this pasuk Kaftareim Knoisim Imenu you that the only time you have to make branches is only if you're using gold. Maybe the Torah is telling you that if you don't make it out of gold, you don't have to use branches. So that you don't you don't say that. Why? Because hahu pamek mikri. That will, if you just make it without branches, that's a lantern. That's not a menorah. Menorah has branches. So you definitely need branches no matter what metal you're using. Then we darshim v'zeh ma'isa menorah miksha zav. Bazav ba miksha, eina bazav, eina ba miksha. The Torah is telling you that if you make it out of gold, then you have to use miksha. It has to be hewn from one piece. But if you're not using gold, then you don't have to make miksha. If you're using lead or tin, you can use it not from one piece of tin. You don't have to chisel it. Miksha the sefer lemay asa. And why does the Torah tell you the 4th time miksha? Lamu'utei chatzotzris, to exclude the chatzotzris. There were trumpets that Moshe made that was used, where the Torah tells you, like say, the Torah Hashem said to Moshe, make 2 chatzotzris kesef, right? Make 2 trumpets of silver. Miksha tasa oisa, that was used in the time of the Midbar, that Moshe gathered all the people, and for the traveling in the desert. And that tells you, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, the trumpets that Moshe made had to be made from 1 piece of silver and 1 block. But if you make it from different pieces of silver, it's kasha. But just if you make it from other pieces of metal, then it's psulim. That means the chatzotzris had to be from silver. But it didn't have to be miksha, although the Chumash says that you should do it miksha. How do you know? Because it says kesef ben avoya. If you look at the pasuk, it says v'hayu. So maybe the Torah wrote miksha and the Torah wrote kesef, and so v'hayu means that it has to be both. And yet you're telling me you don't have to have miksha b'di'evet. The answer is because there's a mir rachmana gabe menorah, but the Torah told you by menorah only the menorah needs miksha. Only the menorah needs miksha. He v'lei chatzaitzes. Only the menorah needed miksha, and not the chatzaitzes. Bottom line is you have 4 times that the Chumash says miksha, right? So if you look at the Chumash, it says 4 times the word miksha. So the first time miksha tells you that the menorah has to be done miksha. That's it. It has to be hun out of 1. Why does the Torah write it a second time? That the Torah tells you a second time that you cannot use, it's la'akev. You can't, it's not the chatchila digadin, that the menorah had to be made out of 1 block. Then the Torah wrote miksha by Bahaloischa another 2 more times. Why does it say 2 more times? So the 2 more times tells you one thing, that if it's zahav, then you could use miksha. But if it's not gold, then you don't need miksha. So here, the Torah already expresses you that the menorah did not have to be made out of gold. And then finally, the Torah wrote a 4th time miksha to tell you that only the menorah needed miksha, but the trumpets, even though it said miksha, but the Eved, you don't need miksha by the trumpets. This was the trumpets. So, but the Eved, it has to be from silver, but it didn't have to be miksha. It only lechatchila should be from miksha and not. And b'diavad it's okay, but only if you learn that the menorah could be made from other pieces of metal. All the psukim make sense. But if you start playing around with it and say, "Oh, other pieces of metal are not good for the menorah, and grutayis is good for the menorah," then it's hard to make sense of the psukim. That's how the Gemara answers up, and that's the halacha. Halacha is that it has to, if you're using gold, it has to be miksha, but you can use other pieces, other metals. Tana Rabbanim, new brisa. Kol hakelim, we go to Chaf Chesam and Beis, Sha'asa Moshe, Kisherim lo Yiksherim lo Doisu. Any keli that Moshe Rabbeinu made was kosher for his generation. You didn't have to remake it after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. It's kosher l'doros. Chatzaitrus, those trumpets, right? These trumpets that we see in the picture. So then, Kesheris Loi was only kosher during Moshe Rabbeinu's time. When Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, they had to make new trumpets. Upsulos l'doros. You couldn't use it again. Chatzaitrus, my tama. So the Gemara asks, what's the reason? Ilema, the Amal Quran pasuk says, Asay lecha. Is when the Torah said to Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, make for you the menorah, the chatzaitzros, the trumpets. So we could darshan lecha only for your generation, but not for the future generations. If that was the case, elamiata vasisa lecha arayin 8. When the Torah told Moshe Rabbeinu to make the arayin, so why don't you say hachanami dulcha that's during Moshe Rabbeinu's time the arayin was good, but when Moshe passed away, they had to make a new arayin. Why don't we say that? Because it also says lecha by the arayin, and we should darshan it the same way. So the Gemara says, Elo. Ilaman de'ama lecha mishalecha. So what does lecha mean? Lecha means that Moshe should pay for it. Moshe had to pay for the chatzaitzros. Ilaman de'ama kaviyacha b'shecha ani roitzi yoshev b'shleim. Or you can learn that the Torah, Hashem was telling you, I would rather you pay for it, but the truth is, you should collect the money from Klal Yisrael. But you are special to me that if you paid for it, I would be happy also. But hainame miboyle lahachi. So that's why it says. So that's what you're going to say by the Arayin. So you can say the same thing. The chatzaitzros, Hashem said, either you pay for it, or you could collect it for the money from the tzibur, and that's okay too. But I would rather halavai would have came only from you. But lecha. So the bottom line question is, how do you know that Moshe Rabbeinu's trumpets were only kosher in his generation and pesulos l'daris? You couldn't use it in any other generation. Answers the Gemara Shani Hasim because it's different. Amakra because the pasuk says lecha trei zimna. Asay lecha v'hoy lecha. If you look at the psukim by asay lecha, it says one time lecha. That's you call meetings and for the travelings. So it says lecha twice. So because of that, therefore, it was only used in Moshe Rabbeinu's time and not in the future generations. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis, Tana Rav Papa, Rav Chanan Kamed Rav Yosef. Rav Papa who's the son of Rab Chanim, had a brisa, and he learned this brisa in front of Rav Yosef. And Rav Yosef is going to disagree with this brisa. He's going to say that I have a brisa that disagrees. The brisa says the menorah came from one piece of gold. If you're going to do it, also shel kesef, you can make it out of silver. Shel batz, shel eva, shel gistrin. You make it out of tin or lead or any other metal. Rebbe Paisel, Rabbi Yosef Behuda Machsha. Rebbe says it's pasul, only silver is good, and Rabbi Yosef Behuda says it's kosher. Shel eitz, but wood, v'shel etza, making it out of bone, v'shel zchuchas, making the menorah out of glass. Everybody would agree that it's pasul. That is the brisa that Rav Papa said. So everybody agrees in this brisa that wood is not good to make the menorah. Amalei, Rav Yosef said, "Ma datach." How do you explain the machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda regarding other metals? How you can explain the brisa? So Rav Papa responded and says, "Amalei beimar kloli prati darshi." There's a klal of prat. There's a klal prat. The Torah tells you vasisa menorahs is a klal, zahav tar is a prat, miksha teyasa menorah is a klal. So a general rule, an example, and a general rule. So you always follow the example as what's included in the general rule. But what is the example? So that's the difference between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. Ma Sava, Ma Prat before Shel Makas, of Kol Shemakas. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says every metal is kosher because gold is a metal, so every metal is kosher. That's the example that the Chumash uses. Umar Sava, but Rebbe learned Ma Prat before Shel of Choshev, I'll call Davar Choshev. So the example that the Torah used was gold, which is very important. So you could use only expensive type of metal like gold or silver, but nothing else. That's what would be the machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. So that would be the machlokes. So Amalei Sami Dadach Mikami Didi. Your brisa is no good, and use my brisa because according to your brisa, nobody permits a wooden menorah. Why? The Tanya we learned in the brisa. I have a brisa that says Klisharish Asher Shel Eitz, Rebbe Paisel, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Machsha. That if it was made out of wood, that's the machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. Any metal is kosher. What about wood? That's where Rebbe is passeling, and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda is Machsha. But my kamipalgi. So how am I going to learn the machlokes between Rebbe? What is Rebbe pasel and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Machsha? Rebbe Darsh Klali Prati. Rebbe is limited. When the Torah gives you an example, you have to be mamish like the example. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Darsh Ribi Amite. Rabbi Yosef says it's darshan all inclusive, and when the Torah said gold, you just limit it. You just only one thing should not be included. Rebbe Darsh Klali Prati, because the pasuk says Vasisa Benairas Klal. Zoftar Prat. Miksha Tiasa Menorah Chaza Klal. Klal Karvat Klal. Yatadon Kena Prat. Ma Prat Mafur Shel Matechas. Av Kol Shel Matechas. The Rav Yosef's version of the brisa was that Rebbe said that all metals are kosher, and the Torah said use gold, but the Torah meant to, as an example, to include other types of metals. And Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda went even further than that. He darsh Ribi Amiyat. Vasisa Menaris Riba. The Torah wrote Vasisa Menaris, which is all inclusive. Menorah can be made out of anything. Zav Tar, the Torah gave you one limit. It should be pure gold. Miksha Tiasa Menorah Chaza Riba. Then the Torah is all inclusive. Whatever you make the menorah is also fine. Riba Mir Riba, Riba Hakal. That's the way you darshan Riba Mir Riba, which means the Torah is all inclusive. My Rabbi Kolmil, you can make it out of anything, even wood. So what do you have to exclude something? You can't make it out of pottery. So we have a machlokes whether wood could be good, and that would have that been the machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. So the Rav Papa said, "Adi Rabbi Sami Didach Mekame Didi." Who says your brisa is better than my brisa? So Rav Yosef said, "Loi Salka Daitach." I have no, because the Tanya have another brisa that supports me. Ein Loi Zahav. If you don't have gold to make the menorah, maybe shal kesef, shal dechoises, shal bazel, shal biadil, shal faris. You can use lead, tin, anything. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda machshir af b'shal eitz. So here you see it. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says wood is good. But Tanya Idich, then there's another brisa that said wood is good. Torah tells you, the brisa tells you halacha. You cannot build your house to look like the temple. That's usher to do. You're not allowed to build a replica in your house of the shulchan or the menorah. That's the brisa. L'yaso the bias tavnis heichel aksader tagnis and ulam chotza keneged zar shulchan keneged shulchan menorah keneged menorah. You can't make a menorah in your house like it was in the base of Migdash. You can make it out of 5 branches, 6 or 8. But for a menorah of 7 branches, that you can't make, even if it's made out of other metals, because other metals could be used in the base of Migdash. Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda Omer, Avshel H, Lo Yasa Kederach She'asu Malcha Beis Chashmonoi. That like it was done in the Malchus Beis Chashmonoi. They made it when the Beis Hamikdash, when they first recaptured the Beis Hamikdash during the Chashmonoim, they actually made a temporary menorah out of wood, and that's what Rabbi Yossi Yehuda says. Wood is good. Amrullah. So they told Rabbi Yossi, B'Sham Raya, is that your proof? Shapudim shel barzel hoyu. Actually, they made it out of branches of metal. The chipim b'bats, and they covered it with lead. So you probably heard bats, and you interpret it as 8 wood. Hashiru, when they became wealthier in the Chashmonoim, also shel kesef. Chazar Hashiru, then they became further wealthy, also shel zahav. They made it of gold. Bottom line is that Rav Yosef disregarded Rav Papa's brisa, and Rav Yosef had a brisa that said everybody agrees all metals are good. The question machlekes between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda was just about wood. Rebbe pasaled wood, and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda was machsher wood, and it depends how you learn the psukim, klal prat klal or ribi. Okay, we'll start from Amar Shmuel tomorrow, Bez Hashem.